All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you could find a seat, um, that would be great. Hi, welcome. We'll just give everyone a moment to sit down. First, I just want to say thank you to everybody who was able to join both in person and also remotely. I think one of the many beauties of technology is the fact that we're able to connect and be together, whether we are here geographically in the same place or if you're joining us from online. We feel your presence regardless. My name is Stacy. I am the program manager for MIT Women's and Gender Studies. I've only been in this position for 9 months, but I've been with MIT and working with Karl for a number of years. And so I'm really, really grateful that each one of you was able to make time and space for us and for him, and to recognize the work that he did with this institution and with a variety of communities, both in the Boston area and then also across the states as well. So we've got a number of speakers who are going to share today from both their own life experiences and recollections of Karl. And then we're also going to share some readings from his academic work. And so first, I'd love to invite Elizabeth Wood up to the podium to speak.
So, hi, everybody. I am faculty in the history department, but I also am a former director of women's and gender studies, and I hired Karl in 2004, brought him on to teach. We needed somebody to teach Introduction to Women's and Gender Studies, and Karl was just amazing from the beginning. From the beginning, he joined the department, the program. Women's and Gender Studies is not actually a department at MIT, and was involved in the steering committee, was involved in teaching courses, involved in everything. And so the first thing I want to remember is the ways that Karl would always totally show up. He would show up and he would be here with his smile, his stories about the commute from Philadelphia, how he managed to do that commute every single 2-3 times a week, getting here. I just learned staying with friends and making that happen. I thought I would say a few words about his biography as the first speaker so that we all can remember some of the many things Karl did. It's really remarkable how much he packed into his life. He was born on February 6th, 1969. So he was just shy of 54 when he passed away on January 28th in his sleep. He got his BA from Smith in 1991 with highest honors in women's studies. He then went on to a PhD at the University of Minnesota, which he got in 2003. He did English literature with a feminist studies minor, and I was reading online from some of his fellow graduate students that he helped create that minor, which just tells you something about how Karl worked, that it wasn't just, oh, yeah, there's a minor, you can do it. It was, no, we need a minor, and I'm going to help make it happen. His PhD dissertation was on passing rhetorics. How do you pass, and the performance of gender identity, autobiographical, visual, and virtual representations of transgender subjectivity and embodiment. He was always a pioneer. He was a pioneer on the subject of gender identity, on the subject of varieties of presentations and passing and crossing disciplines. He was in literature, but he did history, he did art, he wrote about dance, he played, of course, music. For WGS, he taught gender and media studies, queer cinema and visual culture, feminist data ethics. I believe we even have a student here from that class. Feminist thought, which Sally Haslanger and I often teach, and he taught as part of our rotation, gender and sexual identities. In the Graduate Consortium in Women's Studies, which is a consortium of 10 local universities, he taught visual transgressions, gender identities in art and culture with Ganit Ankori, and he taught feminist inquiry with Linda Bloom, who's also going to speak. He taught the workshop for dissertation writers in gender and feminist studies, and he taught a micro seminar in feminist data ethics. So he did a lot of different things and taught a lot of different courses. But I think and while he was at MIT, one of the things he did was in 2010, 2012, he played a leading role in the Women's and Gender Studies Gender and Technology Initiative, which didn't last all that long, but was a very important effort to try to bring together topics of his favorite topics, data ethics and so on. He created in 2012 a workshop called the Gender Technology and Development Workshop. He co-led an MIT workshop on sex trafficking and technology, which brought in some of our best graduate students to speak. He then organized a separate graduate student workshop, Gender and Technology, Labor, Sex, Bodies, Data and Symposium in 2013-14. So he was tireless. He was always coming up with some new thing that he wanted us all to know about. I think in some ways, what I was always impressed with was how proud he was of his teaching at the Sherwin-Nuland Summer Institute for Bioethics at Yale. He did from 2017 to 2022. His interest in bioethics, we'll hear more from his readings, grew out of his fascination with trans issues, with cancer research, with the BRCA gene and its mutations, and I think in some ways, most interestingly, with the issue of civic activism in biological research. How can people with various genes, with various issues, with various medical things get involved? And so in that way, he got involved in, and he advocated for universal BRCA genetic testing for women over 30, so that if they had those mutations which cause breast cancer, they would know it early. He wrote about, in writing on those issues, he helped to found the FemTechNet, a network on feminist pedagogy and technology. So he's bringing his pedagogy to the tech world as well as his tech interests to the university. And he was involved in something in a group called Trans Record, which describes itself as healthcare beyond the binary, improving transgender access to primary and specialty care with patient power. From 2016, he was invited to participate in the Precision Medicine Initiative, which was part of the National Institute of Health. And then one of the projects I heard him talk about most, though I'm no expert and other people in the room may know more, was he was on the steering committee of a genome sequencing project called All of Us, the All of Us project, which was the idea was to get data available to people about their own genes and get them involved in getting that information to the researchers who might be wanting to work on, who needed and wanted to work on that to expand healthcare. So as part of that All of Us project, he was involved in the genomics working group that was trying to get genomic data on 1 million people in the US to get better health outcomes. And then I was reading online, he was involved in 6 other committees through that project. So he never did anything halfway. If he got involved in the genetics work, he did it the whole way. And yet, as everyone knows who knew Karl, the light of his life was his children, Damien and Ani. We're really, really happy to have Damien here. We miss Aunt Ani, but we want her to see this someday. We heard stories about the kids. We saw videos of the kids. We knew that you played music together. We knew that you were just really, truly the light of his life. That is a great quality. We got to hear stories about playing cello and dancing and all kinds of amazing things. So let me just conclude by saying to Karl, we will always remember your smile, your laugh, your wit, your hats, and your great hugs. We will do our best to carry on your work in support of all humanity, but especially trans and queer folk, people suffering from health outcomes, and people needing access to key data about and control over their own bodies. So we're really blessed to have had Karl here to taught us so much. My own daughter is trans, and I had read about trans issues, but I learned more about trans issues from Karl than from anybody else, which made a big difference when my daughter came along and she, definitely turned out to be trans. So anyway, Karl, we've been very, very lucky to have Karl. So the next speaker, I think, is Andrea.
So the last time I saw Karl was last December. Semester was winding down. I said something like, I'll see you after IAP, and I wished him a happy holiday to him and his family. But I had no sense those would be my last words to him. Karl was my hall buddy in Building 14 for many years. He was kind, humble, funny, generous, and a brilliant teacher and scholar. We often talked about our courses. Two of my favorite assignments were stolen from Karl. We regularly checked in about our children and medical challenges of our children. And when I was on leave with meningitis during the fall of 2020, Karl took over teaching my Intro to Women's and Gender Studies class. Karl was a person with a complex and probably exhausting life, teaching and parenting, going from Philly to Boston and engaging in multiple intellectual and activist pursuits, as Elizabeth has said. But you wouldn't immediately know that. And when I read Karl's obituary some months ago, I kept saying to myself, that's amazing. I didn't know he also did that. And there were so many that's. He is sorely missed, taken long before his time. It's an honor to read from one of my favorite of Karl's pieces, That Fat Man is Giving Birth, Gender, Identity, Reproduction, and the Pregnant Body. And this is published in a book called Natal Signs. I can send this to anyone who is interested in it. Did you always want to be pregnant? The social worker peered across the room at the two of us, but the question is directed to me, since I am the patient. My partner and I are sitting in an office in a prestigious urban teaching hospital on a floor dedicated to reproductive medicine. On any given day in this location, scores of women emerge from the elevator, sit in waiting rooms, have vital signs checked, undergo blood tests, ultrasounds, and internal exams, consult with doctors, nurses, social workers, and patient coordinators, all in the attempt to have a baby. These women, the prospective mothers, are often, quote, older by reproductive standards, meaning they are over 30 and fertility is on the wane. Most are accompanied by husbands or male partners in these initial consultations. Less frequently do lesbian couples or single women appear in the fertility clinic. But times are changing. It is, after all, 2006, and we are in Massachusetts. Gay marriage has just been legalized, and these newly minted, newly legitimized couples are increasingly seeking out medical help in starting a family. For some, assisted reproductive technology is a necessary part of the process of conceiving and bringing pregnancy to term. As a female-bodied person on the transmasculine spectrum, navigating fertility treatment, pregnancy, and birth, my gender presentation and its reception throughout the process highlight the social incompatibility of pregnancy with masculinity. The figure of the pregnant trans man challenges gendered assumptions in such a profound way that it is often impossible for transgender and genderqueer pregnancies to be understood as such. Indeed, it is often easier for those embodiments to be read as fat men. It goes without saying that pregnancy is a phenomenon strongly associated with being female. At the same time, it involves dramatic changes to the female body in ways that challenge conventional cultural associations with femininity. For this reason, there is an enormous amount of effort in shoring up the cultural signification of the pregnant body as female and feminine, from representations of pregnancy in popular media to maternity wear, to the discourse produced by and about pregnant women. Although necessarily temporary, being pregnant is more than a condition. It becomes an identity, and one that is bounded and even policed by gender expectations. The social worker's question gives me pause. I hadn't thought much about pregnancy itself. My focus had been on the larger question of whether to have a child and how to add that new person to our relationship, taking us from being a couple to a family. I realized that my answer had to be no, never. Pregnancy per se had never been on my bucket list of somatic experiences I needed to have before I die. But I did want to be a parent and was profoundly curious about who a child of mine would turn out to be. Given the biological realities of my conventional female embodiment and reproductive system, pregnancy seemed to me to be a necessary 9-month expedition I would take, a temporary transformation of the body that would be a mere blip on the larger road trip of life. In many ways, I was right. The necessarily temporal aspect of pregnancy means it is an identity position one moves through, rather than a permanent embodied identity. At the same time, there's no denying the profound physical changes that occur in pregnancy. And my subsequent identity as papa to 2 children has forever changed my life for the better. Prior to my pregnancies, I was frequently perceived as androgynous and was used to encountering gender confusion as people alternately read me as a middle-aged butch woman or teen boy, and sometimes in LGBT communities, I could be understood in line with my own self-identification as a genderqueer trans man, depending on their assumptions and the social context. I did not know how pregnancy would affect my gender presentation, but I was hardly prepared for the degree to which gender would figure in my pregnancy experience. The pregnant man was an oxymoron. Either I could be read as pregnant or male, but never both simultaneously. As my belly grew bigger around my gestating fetus, paradoxically, my pregnancy became in some ways more invisible. I could only be seen as a fat man. Because I had not undergone any steps toward medically transitioning from female to male, my androgynous experience as a pregnant man resonated heavily with S. Bear Bergman's description of himself in his essay, Part-Time Fatso. Whether I'm fat depends on whether the person or people looking at me believe me to be a man or a woman, says Bergman. Bergman's lived experience of being at the receiving end of radically different reactions to his size demonstrates how gendered perceptions our perception of fat really is. As he points out, quote, a man can be much, much fatter than a woman and still be viewed as comfortably within the standard deviation, unquote. Jerry Mosher echoes this observation in Setting Free the Bears, Refiguring Fat Men on Television, writing that, unlike fat women, the fat man's depiction as ordinary suggests that fat men are held to a standard less severe and more forgiving. For me, gender perception, fatness, and pregnancy were inextricably tied up together. Whether I was pregnant or merely fat depended a lot on whether I was perceived to be male or female, and vice versa. Being perceived as pregnant meant for most people that I was necessarily a woman, whereas being fat made me even more androgynous and more likely to be read as a man. The extraordinary inability or unwillingness of people to see, quote, the elephant in the room, me, reflects the degree to which societally we have internalized the gender binary and indeed rely on it for a sense of stability in the world. For most people, the pregnant man represents an impossibility that cannot be reconciled with a normalized sex-gender binary of feminine female and masculine male. The pregnant butch, like the fat woman, is abject, a gender representation that fails to conform to the standards of idealized femininity. Finally, the pregnant fat woman is both abject and experiences the loss of visibility in her pregnancy, doubly masked as it is by her size and the cultural fetish of feminine pregnancy. The invisibility of my pregnancy also extended even to the clinic, though in my case I put it down to the incongruence of my gender presentation with my newly acquired baby bump. As I have described it in another work, this made for some quite humorous encounters with medical staff. We go to a prenatal appointment in my second trimester. The nurse hands the urine cup to my tall, slender partner, saying, "Your husband can wait over there." She looks aghast when my partner informs her that it is not she, but the shorter and fatter husband who is pregnant. For what it was worth, the nurse recovered quickly. She turned to me and thrust the cup in my direction. Well then, I'll need the urine specimen from you in that case. Most difficult for all across the butch FTM spectrum is the invisibility of masculine pregnancy, which can make it challenging to locate services and support, and can especially make the navigation of highly gendered spaces particularly difficult for butch, trans, and genderqueer pregnant bodies. Not least of these is access to public and nearly always gendered bathrooms, which, as any person experiencing pregnancy knows, is even more critically necessary as the due date nears. I stopped worrying about entering the woman's bathroom while heavily pregnant, figuring that my pregnant shape would be reassuring to women in that space. For the most part, it did, until I was confronted one day by an alarmed elderly lady as I came through the door, belly and all. "Sir, you are in the women's restroom." I didn't hesitate in my response. "Ma'am, I'm pregnant." Thank you.
have something a little bit drier to read, although it really picks up on some of the themes. My name is Jen Greenleaf. I'm the librarian for Women and Gender Studies, and I didn't actually meet Karl until Andrea was out sick, and I helped out with the transition as Karl took over Andrea's WGS 101 class, and then helped with the writing class, and then we developed a relationship where he would send students who were seeking information, and it really made me respect and care a lot about him as a colleague because of the real care he took in trying to bring whatever students' interest happened to be into the class that they were teaching, really allowing them to follow their own path and try and fit it into what he was trying to teach. Today, I'm going to read excerpts from a piece that he wrote with colleagues Chris Tenney, Lynette Hammond-Gerito, and Dawn Betts-Green. It's an article called Crisis of Erasure, Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Populations Navigating Breast Cancer Health Information. This was published in December of 2021, and it really says a lot about Karl academically, also about advocacy, and it gives some context to the choice of WGS here at MIT in our choice to honor Karl by donating books in the topics that he really cared about to the library. Many health information and research practices normalize sexualities, pathologize non-normative gender, and fail to recognize gender non-conforming categories. Because breast cancer health information is sexually normalized, an information boundary exists for the LGBTQ+ community, particularly among transgender and gender nonconforming adults who are at greater risk of discrimination in healthcare settings. Transgender and gender nonconforming people experience unique marginalization and risk with respect to breast cancer. Recognizing their information needs in information-seeking contexts involves not only the study of material realities, but also the uncomfortable realization of the privileged positions of library and information science researchers and professionals coexistence within information institutions. Libraries are centers for community engagement and education, and they provide access to health information. Within any library service community, there are diverse groups to consider. The community health information needs of transgender and gender nonconforming people are specific and should be supported. Our research reveals 3 overarching themes emerging from the literature that serve as barriers to breast cancer health information among transgender and gender nonconforming people: access, erasure, and quality. Transgender and gender nonconforming patients and their caregivers may have difficulty accessing information, healthcare, and support services that primarily serve them. In one study, participants were always or very often unable to find the information they needed, about 26% for trans issues and about 28% for medical health information. Breast cancer diagnoses are highly emotional and heavily influenced by family health history. Transgender and gender nonconforming people living with breast cancer may be less likely to rely on support from biological families due to bigotry and non-acceptance. Breast cancer information is complex, and patients need support accessing information outside of the clinical setting to fully understand their medical situation and make well-informed decisions. There is a unique problem of erasure of transgender and gender nonconforming people that sets this population apart from other marked categories of identity, such as race or ethnicity, which are often visually inscribed on the body in ways that sexual and gender identities may not be. Erasure reduces the accessibility of transgender and gender nonconforming health information and lowers the quality of health information available. Patients who are gender neutral or gender nonconforming endure higher rates of discrimination and verbal attacks. Providers of health information must be aware of the dimensions of gender and the consequences of patient disclosure. Transgender and gender nonconforming patients must carefully decide how and when to disclose their gender identity to their medical providers or information agents like reference librarians. Disclosure concerns may reduce the quality of healthcare received because health status, risk, and diagnosis may be inaccurately assessed. A long history of LGBTQ plus bias in the healthcare system continues to make these populations avoid or delay treatment. Actionable recommendations informed by our research include inclusive LIS education, robust transgender and gender nonconforming resources and services, and advocacy. We recommend the need for additional instruction during LIS professional preparation to understand how transgender and gender nonconforming people might be further included in the library and information science educational health topics. Our observation of the conflation of sexuality and gender identity particularly concerned us. We recommend the need to understand better not only LGBTQ plus content as broadly conceived as resources that librarians work to make accessible to communities, but also the specific resources for transgender and gender nonconforming people. LIS education must include tools and information on supporting references and classification to develop these distributed networks and safe spaces for transgender and gender nonconforming people. The Health Allied and LIS community need to work to actively dedicate advocacy and institutional resources to service transgender and gender nonconforming people in their communities. In April 2021, current U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Rachel Levine, stated that discrimination and oppression were challenging equity in transgender health. Levine's position shares the importance of legislation to decriminalize transgender and gender nonconforming behaviors and afford equal protections. This stance in advocacy might help globally to address transgender and gender nonconforming health inequity inclusive of health information. The LIS community has an opportunity to address the paucity of dedicated information resources available to transgender and gender nonconforming people. Through future work in LIS education, resources, services, and advocacy.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're here. My name is Sally Haslinger, and I am a professor in the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy on the philosophy side, also an affiliate in Women's and Gender Studies, and I also teach in D-Lab. I've been here since 1998, and I was around and very involved in Women's and Gender Studies, or then Women's Studies, when Karl was hired. Got to know Karl through those years. My most vivid memories of Karl were when I was director of the program, and we worked hard to form the gender and technology community and get the Darbeloff grant that enabled us to develop the course. And I have to say, Karl was an ideal colleague in Women's and Gender Studies, absolutely brilliant, always full of ideas, always willing to stretch in new directions, incredibly deeply interdisciplinary, always willing to learn from people, take in new ideas, new disciplinary perspectives. And Karl and I were involved in a kind of workshop at D-Lab, and this was before I knew anything about D-Lab. And D-Lab is a program at MIT that works to address global poverty issues through co-design. So we go into communities and we help them identify the problems and what resources are available and teach them a design process for solving their problems and for themselves. And it was a transformative experience to go over there and to be part of that workshop. And Karl was fully embedded in it and appreciated that technology is not just whiz-bang electronics, but technology is a bucket or some kind of simple tool for shelling an ear of corn.
Can you shift the mic? The Zoom folks are having a hard time hearing.
Okay,
Yeah.
that better?
I hope so.
Is that better, everybody? Okay, I can lift it up too.
That would be helpful.
I know it was just down and I wasn't sure. It kind of fell. Is that better? Anyway, so I want to thank Karl for that inspiration, because now I'm very deeply involved in that work. That's my primary work in many ways, and I want to thank Karl for that. So I'm going to read bits and pieces from an article called "I Want to Be a Real Boy: AI Robots, Cyborgs, and Mutants as Passing Figures in science fiction film. And as I was doing this, selecting passages to read, I found it incredibly hard because I don't think I've ever read someone else's academic work in bits and pieces. Like, and you're going, well, wait a minute, are these the parts that Karl would want read? Wait, are these the parts that fit together the way that makes sense to him? And so it's a little awkward and I feel a little hesitant, but here we go, and I'm gonna try and make it, whoops. So laugh, wait a minute, stop. Okay, start. Okay, whatever. So in their occupation of the boundary zone between human and machine, cyborgs in fiction and film are hybrid characters with great metaphorical resonance, standing in for transgressors of many different binary systems, including the dichotomies male-female and able-bodied disabled. They are, in fact, passing figures, and the conflicts they experience are informative reflections of the exchange of cultural codes in relationship to identity management and recognition, and the stakes involved in being read as deviant. In fiction, cyborgs are seductive in their role as passing figures that we know do not really exist. They offer us as readers a certain vicarious pleasure and the risk of boundary transgression, even as they raise concerns about our ability to recognize artifice. Specifically, the conflicts played out in science fiction representations of cyborg passing illustrate the particular dilemma of inner exile experienced by the transgender and enfreaked subject, in which one's own interior sense of identity is fundamentally disavowed by a society incapable of transcending a binary view of embodiment as either normative or non-normative. As a metaphor, the passing cyborg character in film has special significance for transgendered and disabled viewers whose physical bodies do not necessarily correspond to their internal sense of identity as gendered subjects. In a Hollywood context, finding alternatives to the inevitable love stories between able-bodied, normatively gendered heterosexuals is no easy task. So when Steven Spielberg completed the late director Stanley Kubrick's unfulfilled film project about the creation of an artificially intelligent robot boy, I eagerly bought a ticket to AI. A film about robots, I thought, would at least be different. I didn't expect to read it as a transgender film. But when the main character, David, a robot boy, voices his one desire, I want to be a real boy, I sat up and stared at the screen. In those 7 words, the cyborg child had succinctly articulated the female-to-male subject position, one only rarely heard on screen in small-budget transsexual documentaries. As a transgendered person, I knew exactly what he meant. Although his external appearance allows him to pass seamlessly as organic, David finds himself relegated to secondary status after his parents' biological son, Martin, unexpectedly comes out of a coma and returns to the family. After hearing the tale of Pinocchio, the wooden puppet boy who is magically made real by the blue fairy, David becomes convinced that his mother would love him equally if he too could become a real boy like his human brother. Although his stated motivation for the transformation is acceptance, as an already passing cyborg, his desire goes beyond being visually indistinguishable from his human counterpart. David's problem, then, is not a question of passing, but a problem of exile. What separates him from his brother is both his and the family's knowledge that he is different, that although he looks human, he's actually a machine. Their ultimate rejection of David is based on the recognition that he can never truly be an organic boy in the way that Martin is. Ironically, Martin has flaws that accentuate his status as human by emphasizing the fallibility of the organic body. Weakened by his illness, he walks awkwardly with the help of leg braces. David, although synthetic, is built to simulate the perfect male child, white, Aryan, able-bodied. His gait is smooth and unremarkable. a sharp contrast to the jerky mechanical movements of his real brother. Therefore, he conforms completely to the ideal notion of what it means to be human, in the same way that the transsexual seeking to pass often conforms to the gender stereotype of the target sex. The cyborg figure, through its flawless simulation, therefore highlights the constructed aspect of identity and uneasily calls into question essentialist assumptions about what it means to be gendered or even human at all. It is in the context of David's quest to become human that I want to consider him as a representative cyborg figure with parallels to particular disability and transgender experiences. The artificially intelligent robot is actually in many ways a reversal of conventional literary and filmic representations of the disabled. The robot, in its seamless perfection, is caught in the trap of passing. His apparent normalcy belies his inability to function as a normal human being. Rather than fleeing the real limitations of a conventional disability, David's objective is to escape his condition of artificiality, to become the real boy he seems to be at the first place. This is an interesting complication of the usual relationship between disability and passing. David's ease in passing on a superficial level refocuses our attention on his sense of self and interior relationship to his identity. Like the female-to-male transsexual on hormones, he passes well in simple social context, but discovers that more profound interactions with others are impeded by the sharp societal divide between mecha, mechanical, and orga, organic or real people. Embedded in the culture in which he lives, rejected by his mother, Monica, whose first loyalty is to her real biological child, David is abandoned on the roadside with a robot teddy bear and an admonition to find his own kind. Monica's advice to David to seek out his own kind is eerily echoed in an article by transgender activist Dean Spade, who narrates his experience navigating the medical system in an attempt to get authorization for chest surgery. In Mutilating Gender, Spade writes, "After attending only 3 discussion group meetings with other trans people, I am struck by the naivete with which I approach the search for counseling to get my surgery authorizing letters. I have these great, sad conversations with these people who know all about what it means to lie and cheat their way through the medical roadblocks to get the opportunity to occupy their bodies in the way they want. I understand now that the place that is safe to talk about this is here with other people who understand the slipperiness of gender and the politics of transition, and who believe me without question when I say what I think I am and how that needs to look." Like Spade, David is limited in his interactions with those outside his community by their presumptions about what he's capable of and who he's allowed to be. He cannot depend on human insistence in his desired transition from robot to real boy. So I'm skipping a bit, but David ends up going into the woods and finding a bunch of other mechas. These are mechanical people, cyborgs, and they're unregistered and broken, and they're trying to repair themselves. And he is then pursued by an entrepreneurial human showman. And the group that this showman captures takes them into the equivalent of a freak show, where they are going to be paraded about and money is being taken to see them, and then they are destroyed and annihilated to the pleasure of everybody. So the discovery by a flesh fair worker, the freak show is called a flesh fair, that might be a real boy, the discovery that there might be a real boy in the cage calls for reanalysis of the issue of passing and the construction of identity in the film. At what point is a robot too human to destroy? To a biological girl who first spots him with the other robots, David is a child just like herself. He looks and feels real. Only the X-ray machine betrays him by exposing his circuitry. Without the interior probe of visual technology, he is indistinguishable from organic humans in normal social interaction. So the Wrangler's dependence on the X-ray machine to see the truth of David's identity points to the uncomfortable irony evident in an increasingly technological society. The machines have become so prevalent and sophisticated that additional machines are required to make them visible. Indeed, the man first points the device at his own child to verify that it works or to make sure that she too is real, before ascertaining whether David is human or not. Although David asserts he is a boy, that he's called David, once under suspicion of being artificial, he has no rights and cannot escape the scrutiny of the scanner's eyes. The cyborg boy cannot establish his own humanity. He is subject to the judgment of the man and the standards of society to which he would like to belong. The man's belief that the device in his hands will tell the truth about David is a sort of visual realism, not unlike that which is experienced by pregnant women undergoing ultrasound procedures. Like the artificially intelligent robot, the fetus is also a cyborg that cannot truly be seen with the naked eye. The ability to see the interior is equated with absolute knowledge, a means of possessing the truth about what is alive and what is not. Seeing is believing, the old adage goes, but once doubt has been cast on the ability of the naked human eye to really see, we upgrade the technology to enhance our vision of the truth, rather than accepting the possibility that it may not be absolute and knowable. Okay, so then there's a section in which Karl talks about going through TSA scanners and the ways in which TSA scanners allow people to detect breasts and prostheses, etc., and how there has been an increased emphasis on maybe carrying documentation about your gender status, etc., as you go through TSA scanners. This was written in 2004, so that was a kind of much more a newer phenomenon there. And he says, although the association between the ability to see inside a person's clothing and a sense of heightened security is ostensibly predicated on the machine's ability to detect weaponry, the act of scanning also plays into the Foucauldian notion of truth through revelation of the body. The ability to see inside a person demystifies the threat of the unknown. The cyborg will be revealed for the hybrid it is. The rest will be sorted out as mere men and women. And in closing this section, this is the section where the long part of the paper where he talks about just the film AI, and the other part, it's a fabulous, long, extensive paper that I wish you could read all of, or I could read all of to you. He also talks about the film X-Men, but at the end of this section on AI, he says, this change, this needing to see the interior in order to see the truth, is a basic shift in focus from watching what people do to observing who they are. And increasing the state's ability to positively identify a given person has been tied to new biometric technologies. By playing into the societal fear of infiltration, the cyborg infiltrating us, the terrorist infiltrating us, this constant anxiety about that, fear of infiltration by the cunning passing figure, this type of surveillance is made more palatable to a general public who would be leery of reductions in civil liberties, such as those experienced by David in AI. And I want to say to Karl, and on behalf of, I hope, all of us, that we will continue to be attentive to this phenomenon, the interior examination of the body as the truth. And we will continue to fight for civil liberties and fight for understanding of the risks that we're facing. Thank you.
Wow. Hi. Can you hear me? Or do I need to? Yeah, can you? Thanks. You can help me out. I don't really. Sorry. I'm Linda Blum, and I teach at Northeastern, but worked with Karl a lot. And you have to forgive me also because I'm just
feel like I'm going to burst into tears and try to get through this. But I was just thinking while Sally was finishing reading that I can imagine Karl laughing just now because he was brilliant. Those were his words. And it's like kind of an impossible act to follow. I'm much less brilliant. So I first met Karl in either late 2010 or early 2011. We both showed up at a small meeting called by the consortium board. They needed new teams to redevelop their core course in feminist inquiry, to interweave theories and methodologies. And in the ensuing discussion, we could see we had a lot of similar ideas about how we might approach this. So we were sort of fixed up, like in speed dating, and really didn't know much about each other. But we fit the bill for the consortium with their reliance on interdisciplinary co-teaching and teams from different universities. Because I had a PhD in sociology, Karl's was in English, my being at Northeastern, while Karl was at MIT. And it was really an exciting moment for me. I had just moved universities from University of New Hampshire, where I'd been for 12 years, to Northeastern. And I'd been doing a lot of undergraduate teaching at University of New Hampshire. And I think for Karl too, most of his teaching, if not all of his teaching at MIT, was with undergraduates. And not that that isn't, at many moments quite wonderful, but after years and years, it's good to change and have a new challenge. That was really great. And it was great for each of us to have that chance to teach on topics and texts that were very close to our hearts. So we got to know each other after this kind of speed dating because we had to go through the consortium's course development process. And I guess some of you are probably very familiar with that process. Maybe others aren't. It's a really good process, but it's rather strict. You submit rough drafts of your syllabus by certain deadlines. You get feedback. Then you work on more details. They want to know everything, your readings, your assignments. You get everything really spelled out quite a lot ahead of time. And then, discussed by the board, with the board and everything. And so we had a couple of we had a lot of fun actually doing that together over one summer. And I was thinking Karl would have said that was super interesting. I sort of picked up a lot of speech things. We spent a lot of time together over the years. And it was really interesting because you just never guess that looking at us that we really had that much in common. But both of us were pretty nerdy bookworms, I want to say. And we each had a very intellectual approach for teaching a graduate seminar, which you kind of get the feeling of that from hearing some of his work. We really were both also very plural, had a lot of appreciation of different strands of theory and different methodologies, weren't really wedded heavily to any. And we were very open to debates and conflicts between approaches. And we really never wanted to reduce approaches to anything like this kind of superficial identity politics that sometimes our students wished we would reduce things to. Because certainly with Karl, you always knew that, identities are very complex and multiple and can change over time. And I think the students would assume that mine was simple and boring, but Karl knew I was more than that. Sorry. I haven't been back here since he passed away, so it's kind of, it's hard. So we taught then together for the first time in 2012. And as some of you know, it's really hard actually co-teaching. But it was also with Karl, just, really a blast, really a lot of fun. We just would laugh so much. And he was so smart about so many things. And I'm going to be repeating a lot of things that the others have said. But again, I think we just probably looked like, and I know we did to students, like the oddest pairing. Because, we were both white, but I'm straight and cisgender and old. And really also the proverbial tortoise and kind of over organized. Karl was much younger than me, trans and in the queer community, and he was the proverbial hare. He was so fast and very loose in organizing. And we were sometimes really get exasperated with each other because you really have to be so deeply like working together to co-teach. And especially, I think, in this course, the core course of the consortium, or what was then, because the students came with the graduate students came from around the area with very high expectations, wanted a lot. And we had students like, we would just be like, okay, what do we know about architecture? Or, what do we know about getting a PhD in dance? It was just fascinating, but they wanted a lot, so that was hard. And we would get very exasperated with each other. Like, I made grading spreadsheets on my laptop, and Karl gets scribbled in a notebook. And neither one of us liked the other's approach. But, mainly, I think we developed a greater and greater appreciation for each other over time. And he was so supportive. I remember once I was joking before class, like he would do the reading on the all-night bus from Philadelphia. And I would be spending like days of the weekend poring over it. And then I would be like, why did we assign so much? I can't get through it. I read slow. I'm sorry. I just read really slowly. And he was say, yeah, but Linda, you remember it. And he just brought such insight into queer and trans studies and literary arts and visual culture. But he was also really interested in my background that none of the students were interested in because it seems so long ago, but my background in social theory and Western Marxism, in socialist feminism, he was more interested in that than the students. It was pretty funny also because I'm a qualitative sociologist and ethnographic, and a lot of I've some sort of seen as not that much of a sociologist often, but he would be like asking the students, and he was the humanist supposedly in our team, but he'd be saying like, where's your data? I want to see data. So it was a funny pairing. But when I would, we had tough times too, because sometimes, again, the students wanted much more than we could give. And when I seemed the safer target for sometimes we had some quite distressed students with their own conflicts about their identities. Karl just burst out once. How could Linda be transphobic when she's teaching with me? So we went on to teach together every other year over like many years, 8 years, until 2018. And when I decided to share him with Ganit Ankori from Brandeis, our wonderful Brandeis colleague. I don't know, she's not here, right? And I don't know if she's on. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, so I decided I would share Karl. But we kept in touch. And we would get together with always a lot of laughter and a lot of venting over difficulties with our colleagues and misadventures with our crazy universities. Through it all, we supported each other through a lot of tough times, pretty serious health and family challenges. At first, we just needed to share these things because we needed to cover for each other. So even when we didn't know each other, we kind of were forced to know, to kind of just let each other know when it was a bad night, when it was a low energy or very distracted night for the other. And we needed to know our boundaries on what we did and did not want to share with the graduate students. But then this developed to quite an intimacy over time. So of course I was right there. In some ways I'm sorry, like Damien, because I feel like I shared this, but not in the ways that you did. And this is like your story to tell. So I don't want to say anything like out of turn, but I was there, hearing so much about like your Perthes, and actually my son, who's grown, broke his leg, his femur, around the same time that some of that was happening for Karl. He broke his femur very seriously and had to have emergency surgery and a titanium rod. And of course, though, then we also had to it was so bad, we just had to laugh because we were like, our sons and their femurs. And I think I knew, you and Ani were just the center of his life, and he would just lose sleep to maximize his time with you. And so though we'd never met, I mean, I would hear so much about you, as others have said. And I was there as Karl dealt with the BRCA status, the BRCA mutation, the surgeries he went through, the difficult recoveries that led to, of course, his growing health activism that Elizabeth talks so much about. And then in 2018, I surprised him. I think he was in pretty good health then, luckily, because then I turned the tables, and then I had to call him, and I had to say, hey, I've been in the ER, and guess what? I have just had emergency abdominal surgery, so can you cover class? So we, just over time went through quite a lot together. But his growing health activism, as Elizabeth had said, was just so impressive to me. And I remember when he hadn't told me, and then he was in the New York Times. You remember, I don't know if some of you remember this, in 2016, I opened the New York Times, and there's actually the incredibly wonderful picture that you used for the flyer for this. That was in the New York Times in 2016. I was like, wow. And then I knew all about his work with NIH and his growing knowledge about genetics and genomic medicine. And really, he was teaching me about this. So we started thinking about doing some research together, to combine my strengths with his insight and knowledge and insider as a health activist, a bractivist, and his involvement with online communities and the importance of the online communities and social media, and as Elizabeth said, his expertise in bioethics. And we were in the middle of this project when he so suddenly passed away. And in fact, just days before, we'd been texting each other with details of our schedules, because we had been conducting in-depth interviews together with folks in the online hereditary breast and ovarian cancer online communities. And I'm trying to finish a paper that we'd started together. We had started it as a works in progress presentation, actually. But it has been hard for me to go back to it. And I started working on it again this summer, and it's still hard, really. But I owe it to him to finish it. Just writing this and going over it this morning, it occurred to me that I probably don't want to finish it, because then when it's done, it's like this part of my life, this pretty important chapter, is really over. So last January, we had been messaging quite a bit, and I knew that he'd just been on this really good trip to Arizona. I know, like with Damien and Ani and Gretchen and Babakar, and I knew he was on this retreat for his work as a cancer patient advocate. And I knew that he was with some of his dearest friends from the Light Collective, like Jill Holdren. So it gives me some peace to know that he'd just been having such a special time. And in fact, when I first saw Lerna's really shocking message that Karl had passed away, I panicked. And I thought that you were all in some sort of horrible, like, plane crash or something on your way home. So it was weird, weirdly relieving, because I couldn't believe it, but I was so glad that the rest of you were okay, actually. So I miss Karl terribly. For the past dozen or so years, he was one of my closest academic friends, someone who really just got me despite all our superficial differences. So many things come up every week that I wish I could share with him. Good news about a former student. We had so many that we felt like we saw them kind of blossom, weird articles I read. I really wish I could talk to him about them. New aberrations with our weird colleagues. Yeah. In addition to talking about our kids, we shared a lot about coping with aging parents. And I lost my mother just about exactly a year ago, actually, and he was so sweet and caring. And I'm just really, really proud that Karl wanted to work with me so closely for such a long time. And I'm so grateful to have had such a wonderful friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, Elizabeth, Jen, Andrea, and Sally for sharing. That concludes like our formal aspect of this, but quite honestly, if anybody here in the room has any words that they want to share, it does not have to be as formal as what was shared before. Or if anybody on Zoom also wants to share, that would be great. For the folks who are in the room, we do want you to use the microphone just so that people on Zoom can hear you, not so that you feel like everybody's staring at you. But if folks on Zoom want to, we have a mic that we can pass around, so you don't have to stand at the podium if that makes the barrier a little bit lower for you. But if anybody wants to share, we have a microphone that we can pass around. If anybody on Zoom wants to share, feel free to like raise your hand and I'll see that. Yeah.
This is turned on. Yeah. Sorry, I did not prepare anything, but I am one of Professor Surkan's students from last fall. I was in their feminist data ethics class, which was, my first humanities class at MIT. And I noticed right away just how passionate he was about what he was teaching. And what really kind of stood out and made the class special was that every single aspect that he taught, he genuinely cared about and was so involved in all the, we've heard a lot about his activism, but that really came through in his class and his lectures. Every topic that he brought up, he was just so deeply passionate about. He had resources that we could connect to if we were interested in the same sort of activism that he was doing, and just every topic you could tell he had thought so intently about and really planned the class to kind of share what he was so invested in, and it made it a really, really special class.
I'm a very emotional person. I'm always I mean, I'm always crying. I've known Karl since we were 18. 18, over 30 years. And I just wanted to echo what you said, because the hardest part is he was just so open. I hardly know anything about his academic stuff. He stayed with me in Belmont a lot of times working over the years at MIT, but we hardly ever talked about his work. We talked about our families and our parents and our kids. But the hardest part is not having him to share things with. I mean, things come up every week. You know, movies, articles, books, and I just want to text him or give him a call. So I've been sending your mom a lot of texts, Damien, just because I need to reach out to Karl somehow. And that's the most amazing part of him, is that he was so busy and so extended into so many communities and was so personable. It made you feel like you were the only person in the world, you know, that he's really focused and would connect with you, even if he's running off to catch the train. He's such a personable, loving person. I miss him to death.
I hate microphones. I've used them so many times in so many different kinds of jobs, and I always hate them. My son really wanted me to speak, and so I'm going to. I am the woman who got to spend the last 10 months of Karl's life with him. And from the moment that we met, we were always together, even when we were not together, because we were talking, we were texting, we were always together. And I told him every single day that I'm the luckiest woman alive, just the luckiest woman alive. And I'm the luckiest woman alive. I was trying to think of things that I could tell you. I wrote like a little list, you know, but, and Babacar helped me. Things that he liked, silly things that he liked. And one of them was that part in Alice in Wonderland, which Damien, I'm sure, knows well too, because Karl would say it all the time, the I'm not more than a mile high bit, right? If you know that part. And, you know, well, that's not a real rule. It's the oldest rule in the book. It's number 42. Well, it should be number 1, right? Sally, you know what I'm talking about, yeah. Okay. And you like Jack Reacher novels, okay? Like Lee Child's. You like making pancakes on Sunday with the kids, which we did all the time. Yeah, what else, Babacar? What else was on our list? Camping, yes. I could, but you tell me, what was the most important thing on the list? Refinishing wood. Yeah, you guys spent a lot of time last summer refinishing one door. Instacarting. Perfect door. Yeah, Instacarting, about which, Sally, thank you for reading that piece, because I had actually assigned it to a student of mine at Barnard long before Karl and I met, and I only worked out that later, the same way I only worked out later that we had been in the same room at the MLA when what's his face was first presenting a female masculinities book, right? And we were both there at the same time, and I was like 19 or some nonsense, right? Yeah, Halberstam. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so right, I'd assigned that to a graduate student of mine who was working on robots. Yeah. But thank you for that, because one thing that he really liked to do, and did for a number of reasons, was run Instacart, okay? And do TaskRabbit. And we talked about that a lot, because there were 2 reasons that we talked about. And Sally, I think from your face, you're gonna understand what I mean. One was during the pandemic, doing TaskRabbit, he could just show up and be some guy that somebody needed to put together some furniture. He was just there, and he was some guy, and it was done, okay? And it was great, you know? And with Instacart, he was executing the will of the machine. He was part of the machine. He was a cyborg. He was the human interface at the end, right? That's necessary for the algorithm to function, yeah? So we loved we could go out together, and everyone thought we were this like tremendously boring middle-aged couple, right? Like these middle-aged straight white people. which was a real kick in the pants, right? So we decided we were ex-gays, which was also another kick in the pants. And we had a whole story, like whole backstory about how we just made up a lot of stuff. So I miss him very much. I'll always miss him very much. Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Great. Thanks for making me do that. Do you want to say anything?
I spent a lot of my summer with Karl.
You're fine. You're fine.
It was one of the just general best summers of my life.
Mm-hmm. He has like really bad jokes. There are some really bad jokes, you know, like, which I like too. It's really embarrassing. We embarrassed the children a lot by we went to this children's theater production not that long ago, you know, The Wizard of Oz, and we're just laughing the whole time, and of course he's singing, and mortified the children, you know, just constantly mortifying these poor children, and in Arizona too, absolutely mortifying them at all times. It's great to play. I was just at Barbara Love's memorial 2 days ago, and everyone was talking about her goal to be unremarkable. You know, to make lesbians unremarkable. That's why she worked for her jobs, etc. Right? That's why she would still talk to Betty Friedan. You know, right? And what I tried very hard to give to Karl, and Karl succeeded, I think, in giving to me, was many, many unremarkable moments. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to say anything? Like, oh, Sandy.
I want to say something. I didn't think that I would, only because after today's celebration, I know to watch AI. That is, whatever Karl was interested in, I felt like, what am I doing? I need to be interested in that too. Sandy Alexander, literature faculty, have been at MIT for too long. And I just wanted to read what I sent to Lerna after she sent us the news about Karl's passing. This is really devastating news. The most recent conversation I had with Karl was in my office. I had just purchased a new couch for the office. And upon seeing Karl walk past my door in the hallway, I called to him and invited him to come in for a chat and to baptize the couch in the process. We talked about home renovations that Karl had in the works and about future renovations that he was really looking forward to making in the distant future. After our chat, I even went ahead and purchased a book that Karl was not only currently reading for a class, but also was just very riveted by. And the book was titled Really Fake, in search of media, in case anybody's interested. So now I want to make a point of actually reading it in order to honor the memory of one of the friendliest colleagues I've known here at MIT. Maybe that was TMI, but I just felt the need to share that memory. I really can't believe this news. So all of this to say that Karl did make an impression, and I always felt that his way of thinking, his interest was like a guiding light. And so I'm a kind of a biter. Whenever Karl says, I'm into this, suddenly I'm into it too, so.
Thanks, Sandy. All right, so I'm just going to close things down. Jen mentioned earlier that we are taking donations for a collection of books in memorial of Karl through the MIT Library. So we take cash donations, we take check donations. There is also a hyperlink that I can provide to folks if they need it. For folks on the Zoom, I'll put it in the Zoom chat. But you're welcome to contribute in that way, and we'll be buying a set of books that's all related to the various interests and disciplines that he wrote to. But we also welcome folks to stay, get to know each other. We have a variety of food dinner items out in the hallway for you. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to everybody who shared and who brought energy into the room.